we're all in this together and we all can learn from each other. And one of the great things that John Hattie says, to paraphrase it, is that everything works, but everything doesn't work for everybody. So when we look at that, look at the say what works, what doesn't work, and how can I make it better?
Welcome, everybody. This podcast is all about you. Why knowledge matters. Welcome. I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Erik M.Francis, to discuss his book, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge. Welcome, Erik Francis, to be on the show. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you, Yannick. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Now, to start, who is Erik M. Francis in one sentence?
Erik M. Francis is a proud father who writes books and provides professional development to schools and their staff.
Wonderful. Now, of course, the first question is what made you write the book in the first place? And so let's start with giving us an introduction to depth of knowledge because it has a very interesting history, actually. And the book that you wrote is actually critical because it is widely used, at least the concept, but not necessarily as it was intended to be by Norman Webb. So please walk us a little bit through the steps that you took and when you came to this realization how important this book is, Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge.
Well, thank you. Yes, and you're absolutely correct. The intent of how depth of knowledge has been interpreted and expressed to everybody has been completely inaccurate and inconsistent with what Norman Webb originally intended depth of knowledge to be. First of all, it was never meant to be a method and model for teaching and learning. Norman Webb created it as a criterion for alignment studies. What you would do is you would take your standards and you would categorize the cognitive demand or the context in which students must understand and use their learning using 1 to 4 scores. So the 1 to 4 DOK levels are not actually a taxonomy, they're a rating scale. So you would take your standard and code it a DOK1, DOK2, DOK3, or DOK4. Then you would look at your curricular activity or assessment item that addresses and assesses the standard. And then you would see how closely those items address and assess the standard. So that was the original intent and purpose of depth of knowledge. Dr. Karen Hess expanded it to make it a measure of cognitive rigor. What she did was she superimposed Bloom's revised taxonomy, which categorizes the complexity of thinking students must demonstrate with the DOK levels to mark and measure the cognitive rigor of academic standards, curricular activities, assessment items, and questions. What I did with it was I was responsive to the community, to the education community, saying that we want this to be a method and model for teaching and learning. So, how I spent the pandemic when all my professional development was torpedoed was that I did some extensive research into how could I turn depth of knowledge at DOK levels into a method and model for deeper teaching and learning. So I conducted extensive research on response to intervention, RTI. I conducted extensive research on multi-tier system support, MTSS, the PLC process, the 4 questions, the 4 critical questions. And what I did with it is that I turned DOK into a method and model for deeper teaching and learning. So it's kind of interesting because you have 3 people who took this model that was originally created by Norman Webb and expanded and extended it or innovated it to be what it is today. So if you are looking to do alignment studies with your standards and your assessments, you would look to Norman Webb's work. If you would look to measure the cognitive rigor of your standards, your activities, your assessment, your questions, you would look to Dr. Karen Hess's work. If you were looking to establish a method and model for teaching and learning, that's how you would look for my work. Because what I do is that I say is that teaching and learning for depth of knowledge starts with the standard, but tiers to where the students are so they can rise to reach and go beyond that DOK level or DOK bar set by the standard.
Were there any indications specifically in your childhood that made you pursue the path that you pursuing now?
You
Writing
know, it's
books and
interesting. It's interesting that you say, yeah, I never expected to be on this pathway. My childhood dream was to work in the film industry and to be either a screenwriter or a film director or film producer. And that's actually where I got my first master's degree from, Syracuse University in film and television production management. And I did work in the film industry for my first 2 years of my career after I got my master's. And I did work for a big name producer. I actually worked on the Sony and Warner Brothers lot, but I walked away from it because I didn't like it. It was not a healthy experience. It was not the, as I like to say, the dream turned into the nightmare. So I decided to become a teacher because one, I enjoyed working with kids. I've always worked with kids. I was a camp counselor. And number two, I have a strong value in education. My father instilled that in me, to have a strong value in education. So I became a teacher. And then I had the career all mapped out, and I was following that pathway. Classroom teacher, site administrator, was going to go work at a district office, probably a director of curriculum instruction, assistant superintendent, superintendent, teach college. Well, as things happen, you realize that's not exactly what you want. So I went in a different pathway, and I started working at a state education agency out here in Arizona where I live. And I learned about policy, I learned about finance, and I specialized in an area of policy and finance and planning called Title One here in the States. And then I became a consultant with that. And I always wanted to be a writer of some sort. I've written screenplays since I was a kid. I used to write comic books. I used to write novels when I was a kid. So when I started presenting at conferences, someone saw my session, and I actually had three publishers come up to me and say, "Would you like to write a book?" So I said, "Sure." I never thought I would write a book on education, but yeah. So I wrote my first book with ASCD. Now that's a good question. And then, I tutored off a little bit from writing because I was doing more work. But when the pandemic hit, that's where I started writing again. I wrote Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge there with Solution Tree. My newest book, Inquiring Minds Wants to Learn, just came out from Solution Tree actually this week. And, I'm back on that writing track. So I think the biggest thing to realize is that this was not planned. This was not an option. This wasn't even in my mindset. It was something I discovered. It was a career that I kind of created. It's kind of interesting because now you see a lot of people wanting to venture into this profession. I can't tell you how many people, oh, I want to do what you do. I want to write books. I want to, go and do presentations. I want to be an education consultant. But why do you want to do it? Because you really got to understand your why for why you do how you do what you do. And it's not about the money, it's not about the travel, and it's not about you. It's about what are you doing, to basically give back to education as a system and as stakeholders. That's where you'll be most successful as an education author and presenter. And those I know who even do this, those are the ones who are most successful, the ones who give back to the community and give back to the system and give back to the stakeholders. That's what makes them really successful. So if you want to do this, don't look at this as a goal and don't look at this as an escape or a solution. It's an option, but really understand why you want to do this. I think that's the big thing about being an education author and a presenter, like the way I do things.
how has it changed your life in terms of your family life? Because you just recently also were in Singapore, so you're still traveling actually a lot, and you actually also prefer having these one-on-one encounters. Like it's very different than giving a presentation online, as you mentioned, previously when we talked.
Yeah, it's what luckily I have a very supportive family. And I have a family who understands that, their dad and their husband works hard for the money. And I do work hard. And this is hard work. This is, people see us on social media, we're flying here, going there. You talk about, just went to Singapore. It was fantastic, but that was a 17-hour nonstop flight. That's a lot. and then you deal with airport delays. I don't know if you can even hear my voice. I'm a little congested because I brought back a cold for it. And I know it's kind of like play a violin for them and everything, but it's changed it for the better. I like that my children get to see that their dad is an entrepreneur who works hard, who they see how hard I work, they know how hard I work, they see what I'm accomplishing. It's taught them that they can accomplish anything. They're older now. I've been doing this now for 12 years. When they were younger, I felt a lot of guilt about it, but I just also made sure that I was present. I called every night, with technology with Zoom, that allows you to zoom in with people or video phone conferencing. So, and I'd ask my kids, I'd say, do you feel like I'm not there? And they never felt that. They never expressed that. And I think I honestly believe them. I don't think they're saying that to be kind, but um, the hard part, I think, is being away from your creature comforts of home. I mean, it's nice to travel, it's nice to visit different places, it's nice to experience different things, but your home's your home. And for example, I'm right here in my office. I love my office. It's my fortress of solitude, as I like to call it. And I'm not here when I'm on the road, but it's really changed it for the positive. But this is hard work. I mean, every day you wake up unemployed when you do this. I mean, it's not like every day I have a job to go to or I work 5 days a week and I have weekends off. I mean, every day I wake up unemployed. I'm either have a job, I have to get a job, I have to create a job, or I have to convince someone to give me a job. And that's every day. That's the grind. So this is a grind and people need to realize that it's a grind. Just because of what you see on social media and you see us travel everywhere, there's things behind the scenes that it makes it tough. And it's a lot of work. And no one's an overnight sensation. I mean, there's a lot of people you see who are doing things. This has been years and years and years to building up to this, to where you finally get some attention, accolades, and some, recognition. It's not going to happen overnight. And, the money doesn't come quick and money comes and goes. I think the big thing during the pandemic, what it taught us is that how we have to be resilient when we do this.
And just the writing process in and of itself is also just, I can imagine it's really tough, and then you have to do research and the editing and communicating. And yeah, it's, I like that you're so honest about how tough this work actually is. There's no escape, and that's, it's really the ground, but it's also inspiring. I love that, and thank you so much for the
If you
beautiful
talk
work.
to anyone who does what we do here and writes books, they'll tell you the writing is the hardest part. There it's kind of like a joy and a pain. It's a joy for me because it allows me to have some sort of artistic expression and creative expression of what I do. I write for a publisher who also requires me to cite resources. So there are some publishers, they don't ask for citations, they don't ask for research. They ask for like writing your manifesto or just give me your ideas. But with the publishers I publish with, both ASCD and Solution Tree, they want research. They want research to back up what you're saying and to support what you're saying or to innovate other ideas. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy that because it teaches me more about the system of education, the profession of education. I have learned so much more from what I was writing by doing the research. There's always something I stumble on, and it takes me down all these different rabbit holes that I have to sometimes pull myself out of. But I think that's kind of that's the joy and pain of writing. It is arduous. It's hard to bring those words out, what you want to say, a way you want to say it that's clear and comprehensible. But at the same time, you got to make sure that you're citing the research. And the other thing is, Yannick, you have to honor the research that comes before you. There's a lot of times people will say, "Do it my way, don't do it that way." That's not my approach. My approach is to honor the research that comes before you. And the challenge is, how do you innovate that research? Like I didn't invent DOK, and I'll be the first to tell you, I didn't invent DOK, but I took it in a way to innovate it that makes it work while still staying true to the basic concept of it is that DOK is about what comes after the verb. And this is an innovative way to do it. We can agree to disagree, but you never, you know, poo-poo on, lack of a better word, poo-poo on someone else's work. Or you say, oh, don't listen to that person, listen to me. There's a lot of people who have created careers by saying, unfortunately, don't listen to that researcher, listen to me. That's not the way it is. We're all in this together and we all can learn from each other. And one of the great things that John Hattie says, to paraphrase it, is that everything works, but everything doesn't work for everybody. So when we look at that, look at the say what works, what doesn't work, and how can I make it better? But don't go out there and say, don't do their way, do my way. That is just not only unprofessional, but it's unnecessary. Educators don't need that.
Everything works, but not everything works for everybody. That's wonderful. And that's also why it is so important that there are different writers, different approaches, different ideas, and we frame it differently to put into different models and a way of seeing things. And so now let's go a little bit to the how, because this book is really helpful, especially if you're teaching, because it gives you a framework, a model in which you can really unpack whatever material you have to teach, to make it somehow that it sticks, for the students, really. So let's dive a little bit into the how. Give us some examples.
Well, the interesting thing about deconstructing standards for depth of knowledge, it's the next step in unpacking or unwrapping the standards. It extends the process, the great process that Larry Ainsworth established back in the early 2000s. Now, with that process, what people generally do is that they circle the verbs to identify the skills students must perform and underline the nouns to identify the key concepts that must be taught and learned. That's a great method. And if you notice, like I said, I'm not saying don't do Larry Ainsworth's method, do it my way. That's a great method. That was also a great method that worked when we had No Child Left Behind standards that focus more on students demonstrating their ability to perform skills and demonstrate their knowledge of key concepts. What makes these standards, the college and career ready standards, and now these next gen standards, as they're calling them, is that they're contextual. To determine the DOK level, that's what DOK focuses on, context. To determine the DOK level of standard, you still do the Ainsworth method. You circle your verbs and you underline your nouns. But then what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take a highlighter and highlight everything that comes after that first verb in the objective, and don't stop until you get to a period or a semicolon. So if I had determine a theme of a story from details in the text and explain how the details support the theme. So the first verb I would circle is determine. And there's another verb in there, explain. So I know there's two verbs in there. So what that means is that standard has at least two objectives. Now, now I go and look for the content. I know I have to teach them theme, details, text, and basically that's the focus. So it's the concepts that are in that standard. But now I take a highlighter and I highlight everything that comes after determine, and I don't stop until I get to a period. Now I look what's in the yellow, that highlighted area. So what exactly am I determining? A theme from details in the text. So that's one objective. But then you have a conjunction there that says and. That means, oh, there's another objective. So I have two objectives. So then I start again. Explain what exactly, how the details, how deeply support the theme. So I have two separate objectives they have to achieve to demonstrate to achieve they have to achieve to demonstrate competency or to perform successfully or demonstrate proficiency. So that's the next step with deconstructing the standards. You still do the Ainsworth method where you circle the verbs and you underline the nouns. But what I'm asking people to do is take a highlighter and highlight everything that comes after that first verb. Then you look basically and say, okay, What do they have to do to show that they learned it? And I give them four simple things. They either have to answer, which is a DOK1, explain or express themselves, that's a DOK2, justify or verify, that's a DOK3, or explore and extend, that's a DOK4. So let's look at those two objectives. Determine a theme of a story from the text. I have to explain what that is. That's a DOK2. But then it says explain how the details support the theme. I have to verify that. That's a DOK3. So I now know that whole objective is a DOK3 because that last objective is the most demanding. I also know what the kids are going to be asked on the assessment. They're going to be asked to achieve that first objective, that second objective, both objectives, or just say, what is theme? So that's how deconstructing with depth of knowledge works. Do the Ainsworth method, the great Larry Ainsworth method. Circle your verbs, underline your nouns. Then take a highlighter and highlight everything after that verb and don't stop until you get to the period. Now, look closely. Are there conjunctions like and or? That means more than one objective. Are there commas? That means more than one objective, possibly more than one condition. Then you have to ask yourself, how do the students respond to that standard? If they have to answer, it's a DOK1. If they have to explain or express how they got that answer or what the answer is, that's a DOK2. If they have to justify or verify with evidence why that answer is what it is or why it's correct or incorrect, it's a 3. And if they explore and extend their answer, which means that they go beyond the text, beyond the curriculum, beyond the classroom, then it's a DOK4.
How do you use your work for your personal ends, let's say? How do you apply it for yourself? Because this seems to me extremely practical as a way of, doing whatever you do in your work, you know, as a framework to whether it's writing a book or organizing a presentation and so on. How do you concretely yourself in your work, because it's a little bit different than teaching, use your work?
What it's made me do is it's made me want to learn deeper. It's just, not just accept answers. Answers come free. Okay. I mean, we can go on the computer and get the answers to everything. And now Chat GPT can actually explain the answers to us in a humanistic tone. It makes me want to know why. It makes me want to find evidence. It makes me want to consider hypotheticals. What if, like, for example, what if the DOK levels could function as an RTI or a multi-tiered system of support? What if the DOK levels could strengthen support your PLCs? That's where it really gets into it, that real critical and creative thinking. It also allows me to explore and extend because, as you heard, I'm not just focusing on DOK and I'm not just focusing on standards, I'm focusing on other areas of education. If I didn't call that book Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge, I would have called it The Missing Link because I really believe DOK is the missing link for that answers those questions or addresses those questions. They're like, well, how are we supposed to get kids with special needs to achieve the standard? Well, you tier it to a DOK level where they are. And you tier it to even, and you use their IEP goals to help them get to, through, and beyond the standard. How are we supposed to get second language learners to achieve the standard? Well, you use language objectives, and that will actually increase the DOK level of your learning experience. What do we do about the gifted and talented? That doesn't mean they all have to demonstrate their learning at a DOK4. That's a misnomer. That is completely misleading. You need to basically, with gifted and talented, you need to decide whether the students need acceleration, which means, do they need work that is at a higher grade level, or do they need enrichment, which means, do they need that work personalized to their strengths and interests and needs? That's where DOK comes in. And in the book, I talk about it. Not many people know there used to be a 6-level DOK that was specifically for special needs and second language learners, second special needs students and second language learners. And they retired it because, a conclusion, I brought it back to say the eDocs, which I call eDoc 1 and eDoc 2, where you basically recognize and respond, that you use to do your IEP goals or your language objectives, and you overlay them on the four DOK levels. And I work with a school for autism out here to use ABA methods, applied behavioral analysis methods, to do this, to work with special needs students. And also, I have a second language learner background with training. So, how would you put your language objective in there? So, if I said to you, determine a theme of a text and use declarative sentences to explain the theme, that's a language objective. I just upped the DOK level or just made it even solidified that DOK level to what they have to do. And if I basically said, using language objectives for any objective, that will strengthen and deepen the DOK level. The gifted, I created a thing called GDocs, where GDoc 1 is acceleration. And a GDoc 1 is you could do this at a DOK 2 at your grade level, but could you do it at DOK 2? Let's say you're in third grade. Can you do it at DOK 2 at fifth grade, at eighth grade, at high school, post high school? The GDoc 2 is how can you personalize what you're learning? And that's where gifted kids who need enrichment or need more of that personalization. So that'd be asking them, well, what's the way you can do this? And they get choice there. So that's what I mean by DOK. Really, I look at it as a missing link, a lot of things to learning. And I look at it as a solution. So I know we're kind of diving into this if you don't mind me going in this direction. One, you remember I told you that Norman Webb created DOK as a criterion for alignment studies? We need to bring that back because there's a lot of open free resources out there that are saying that this is aligned to the standard or this is at this DOK level. I'll give you an example. A lot of things on teacher pay teachers, they say, oh, my activity addresses the standard. Well, not exactly. And if I go on Chat GPT and I say, I want DOK 3 questions for this topic, or I go on Magic School AI and they actually have a DOK question generator, who's vetting the fact that those are actually the appropriate and accurate DOK levels? That's why we need to bring back what Norman Webb originally created it as a criterion for alignment studies to say, if the standard is this, and there's these different objectives using that deconstructing method I use, and it's at these DOK levels. Now I pulled this activity off teacher pay teachers. Now I got this thing off Chat GPT or OpenAI or Magic School. How do I really know that it's addressing and assessing the standard at the level demanded? I did a PD where I took a science standard, and the science standard said develop and use a model to explain the functions of a cell and the way the parts contribute to the function. There's four objectives in there. The overall standard is DOK 3, but then I went teacher pay teachers and I entered that standard in there and I got this worksheet where all they're doing is labeling the parts of the cell. And I showed the teachers, I said, which part of this worksheet does addresses which standard? And they said none of it. I go, well, I'll say it's using a scientific model. We'll give it that, but it's insufficiently aligned. So that's the big thing about DOK, why it's important to bring it back and understand it. In my life, as you said, it's about it gets me to think deeper. It gets me to think critically. It gets me not to just accept answers. I've always been that way. I've always been that kid who asked why. I've been asking why ever since I could talk. My teachers weren't crazy about that. In fact, I have report cards over here. I can show you. It probably says that Erik asked too many questions. Um, and that's the thing to how I use DOK in my life. I'm always looking to explain, justify, or verify, or explore and extend how I can use what I learned.
And this is really also the future of education, because it's about, how learn how to think, right? And that's really what helps you, because you also you give examples of question to actually ask,
Mhm.
students, in order to go deeper. Because as you said, now with ChatGPT and all those kind of things, you can just pull out just with one sentence and it gives you all the answers. But what you never can just easily get, and what always requires to some extent still your brain, is how to actually ask good questions. And that's also something that you really address in this book.
And that's the other interesting thing when it comes to questions and questioning. It takes critical and creative thinking. Actually, I think it takes more creative thinking than critical thinking. I like to compare saying that um, when you when you ask somebody to ask good questions, you're basically saying to them, "Okay, I want you to paint the Sistine Chapel on this ceiling, or I want you to go and play a Van Halen song perfectly." That's hard. You know, it takes a lot of training and talent. A lot of it's a natural gift and skill. I'm a questioner and I'm a creative thinker questioner. And, you know, that's a blessing and a curse because a lot of people don't like how I ask questions because they think, is he testing me? Is he expecting an answer? No. And that's the other thing I talk about with questions and questioning. When I ask you a question, I'm not testing you. I'm prompting you to reflect before you respond. I'm stimulating your thinking at all different levels. But to go and say, you know, you need to ask better questions, you need to ask good questions. I mean, you can turn around and say, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? You know, and that's the thing, that's the great thing about chat gpt, AI, generative AI. um, it will give you the questions, but here's the thing I say about AI: it's a stimulus, not a source. What that means is that you should use AI to get your information, to get your questions, but that should stimulate your critical and creative thinking. It's not just, oh, okay, now I have the answers. Like, and this is what we need to teach our kids because everybody's so afraid of our kids copying off AI and Chat GPT. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but teachers are actually getting their lesson plans verbatim and getting their questions verbatim off Chat GPT. So what it's there's a use it as a stimulus, not a source. When I want to ask good questions about a topic I don't know about, I'll go on Chat GPT and I'll get a bunch of questions and I'll say, hey, that's a good question. Hey, that's a good question. Hey, what does that mean? Okay, well, can I ask a better question than that? And that's what I mean. We need to teach people that Chat GPT is a stimulus, not a source. It's meant to make certain things simple, but as with anything with technology, whether it's Google, where it just gives you the answer, or it's Chat GPT, where it can explain the answer or do it for you, that should prompt us to develop and demonstrate and deepen our critical and creative thinking. It's that if the computers can take away the hard yet simple task, when I say hard, it's difficult, but when I say simple, it's straightforward, just to its complete end, means to an end. If it can do that, that's great because that frees up our mind to think critically and creatively of how we can use what we've learned in different and deeper or innovative and inventive ways. I say to people when it comes to AI and ChatGPT, don't make the same mistake we made with Google. Because I always have people, when I say what's a good question, they'll say one you can't Google. No, that's not true because everybody uses Google. Okay. But can you think critically about the answers you're given? That's what we should have been using with Google. Why are those answers accurate? How can I use those accurate answers as examples and evidence? How can I use those answers to explore and extend further what I'm learning? See how I'm tying it back to DOK? So AI and Google and e-resources and e-tools, they allow us to go to deeper DOK levels. And it's okay because the answers come free thanks to technology. Now we need to think about how they get those answers, why those answers correct or incorrect. What if this happened? Should it be this, or what else can be done now we have the answers? And notice that ties into DOK there.
What impact do you wish this book will have on teachers and school districts in general?
I hope that teachers realize this will make their job easier and the kids will be working harder and smarter to learn. A lot of our teachers are spending a lot of time planning these elaborate activities and doing all these things that never turn out the way that we planned them. And we really have to ask ourselves, what did the kids take away from that experience? We talk about the exit ticket. Well, the exit ticket tells me what you took away from today, But can you tell me a week from now, or can you tell me a month from now, or by the end of the year, or 5 to 10 years from now when we're connected on some whatever social media platform, what you learned that day? What I hope with deconstructing with depth of knowledge is that teachers understand it's not just about the level of thinking students must demonstrate. It's not about the content students must learn. It's about what exactly students must learn and how deeply must they learn it and how can they express that in their own unique way. The other thing I hope is that teachers realize that with depth of knowledge and teaching this way, they can find a balance in assessment. With a standardized assessment, you are given 1 day or over the course of 1 week to show what you know. And what if that was a bad day, or what if that was a bad week? Or what if those were bad items on the assessment? It's called a standardized assessment because that's the standard. Some like Journey sings, some will win, some will lose. Some are born to sing the blues. Okay. And if more kids win, what are we going to do? We're going to raise the standard. Not everyone's supposed to get 100 on a standardized assessment. Okay. But if the kids can't show their work or can't show their proficiency or demonstrate their proficiency on a standardized assessment, how can you balance that to create an authentic assessment that says, well, wait a minute, the student does know this, they can do this, they do understand this, they do understand it deeply, they just didn't understand it that day, or they didn't understand the item they were given. If I gave you Green Eggs and Ham, The Outsiders, and Pride and Prejudice, and I asked you, what is the theme of each story and how do the details in the story support the theme? If you could do it with one book, then really you can do it. You just can't do it with the other books, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And the reason why you can't do it may not be because you don't have the cognitive ability, it's that you may not be able to access the text. People are more familiar, children are more familiar with The Outsiders than they are with Pride and Prejudice. So maybe they can determine the theme simpler or easier. Or and you know what actually the hardest one is usually with that is when I've given that to high school kids, Green Eggs and Ham, I say, what's the central idea or theme of Green Eggs and Ham? They usually say, don't, they say, eat the green eggs and ham. I go, no, no, that's not the central idea or message of it. It's not it's basically what are we doing to create balanced assessments that we're not just relying on 1 day or a 1 week or one snapshot to say this exemplifies your learning. At the same time, what I also hope is this book will have teachers really looking at their standards. And this is a very, very controversial thing to say, but a lot of people either don't recognize or don't understand their standards, and that's okay because number one, we stopped looking at our standards during the pandemic. Our teachers, the way we did this, we went into our protection mode. I'm not saying everybody, but a large amount, we went into our self-preservation mode. What do we know? We know how to teach our stuff. So what do we teach? Our stuff. The other thing is our standards are changing. Everybody's moving away here in the States from those Common Core standards for bad branding. And also, it's been 10 years since the standards came out. And also, we had a pandemic. So a lot of things have changed. So, what I'm hoping is that this book will be the perfect time and part of the perfect storm for us to really relook not only at what our standards say, but how can we understand and use our standards to guide our instruction and guide our students in demonstrating proficiency. And that's all subjects. It's not just the tested subjects. Social studies should be looking at their standards. Art and music should be looking at their standards. PE, CTE, they world language. They may be broad, they may be general, but that allows you to make instructional decisions at the local level. But still, that standard is what it means to demonstrate proficiency. It's the academic identity of that student at that grade level in that content area with that subject. Get the kids to it, get the kids through it, get the kids beyond it, find where they are on the pathway to proficiency, build upon their strengths again, to, through, and beyond the standard. That's what DOK will help you do.
What makes you feel alive?
What makes me feel alive? Gosh, the success of my children, the happiness of my children, the happiness of my family. I know it sounds very, but seeing my family happy, knowing my family is benefiting from the work that I'm doing with this. Um, Really, every day is a blessing. My dad, was a double amputee, lost his legs in a car accident in 1965, and I talk about him in my new book, Acquiring Minds Want to Learn. And he taught me to suck the marrow out of life and really don't take every day for granted. I mean, I watched my father unfortunately pass away, and it's not like in the movies where it goes, the EKG goes beep, 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 beep. Take a long time. I look at that as my father wanted to live. And every day is a blessing, and every day is a joy. And sometimes you have bad days, and sometimes you have good days. It's that, how can I take this and make this a learning experience for me? So I would say what makes me really feel alive is knowing that my children are happy and healthy, my family is benefiting from, the work I'm doing, and that I look at each day as a new opportunity. Do I have bad days? Yeah. But I like to say that tragedy is temporary, and I get to decide whether the story ends as a tragedy or as a Shakespearean comedy.
Beautiful. Erik M. Francis, thank you so much for being truly a blessing to me and to the world and for being on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. I hope people, I know sometimes you can come off like you come off as a know-it-all with all this, and I try not to. I try to say I know a lot, but really my mantra is rethink everything. And I get that from Adam Grant. And he wrote a great book called Think Again, is that here's the kind of like the mantra I live. Like I'm right. And at one point I was right, but why am I right? So what I try to say to everybody is this, is that the secret to teaching with depth of knowledge with an inquiring mind is this: ask this question, say this: you're right, but why? And you may be right, and you may have been right one time, and you may not be right, but man, you learned. And that's the thing, that's the big thing. So basically, I ask people to rethink. People have to decide whether to reconsider. So thank you very much, and thank you for saying that. That really means a lot to me.
Erik M. Francis. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.